Hello, and welcome to the Partner for Climate Protection Milestone 4 and 5 webinar for the Atlantic region. I am Tanya Leach, Managing Director of Quest, Quality Urban Energy Systems of Tomorrow. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. We have an exciting and informative webinar planned for you, including presentations from 2 expert researchers on the topic of community energy plan implementation and participation from 2 local Atlantic Canada experts who will help you navigate through your provincial structure. The purpose of this webinar is to provide you with useful information, case studies, and resources to help you facilitate your municipality's transition from PCP Milestone 3 to Milestone 4 and 5. Our agenda includes an overview of the organization delivering the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Partner for Climate Protection Regional Climate Advisors Program in Atlantic Canada, a brief recap of the PCP program, and introduction to Milestones 4 and 5, an introduction to current leading research and examples on the implementation of collaborative regional sustainability plans, an overview of lessons learned from the Community Energy Planning Getting to Implementation in Canada initiative, information and resources available in your province, and last but not least, a summary of available resources. So let's get started. In 2017, Quest was selected to be the Atlantic Regional Climate Advisors for FCM's Partners for Climate Protection program. Quest is the voice of the smart energy communities marketplace in Canada. Smart energy communities improve energy efficiency, enhance reliability, cut costs, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. With a network of 8 provincial and regional caucuses, their related working groups, and conducting leading research, Quest is supporting governments, utilities, and energy service providers, the real estate sector, the product and professional service sector, among others, to implement smart energy communities. Quest's role as Atlantic Regional Climate Advisors is to encourage active participation in the PCP program and to offer training, knowledge sharing, networking opportunities for PCP members. Joining us today on this webinar in order of appearance are Samantha Peveril. Samantha leads Quest's activities in Nova Scotia, including the operation of 3 working groups. She is part of Quest's research team and is the Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Labrador FCM PCP Regional Climate Advisor. With an inquisitive mind and a proficiency for research, Samantha has a wealth of knowledge and is often called upon to provide presentations and information for stakeholders in Nova Scotia. Next, we will hear from Dr. Amelia Clark from the University of Waterloo. Dr. Clark has been working on environment and sustainability issues since 1989, including as president of the Sierra Club Canada. She is now a faculty member in the School of Environment, Enterprise and Development, where she is also director of the Master of Environment and Business Executive Education online program. Her main research focuses are related to strategies for sustainable development and include a $500 million team project on structuring cross-sectoral social partnerships to more effectively achieve local sustainability goals and other desired partner outcomes. Following Dr. Clark, we will hear from Sarah Marchionda. Sarah led Quest's 3-year Community Energy Planning Getting to Implementation in Canada research initiative from 2015 to 2017, in addition to leading multiple other research initiatives that have helped to advance smart energy communities in Canada. Prior to her work at Quest, she worked for the Centre for Urban Energy at Ryerson University, where she facilitated roundtable discussions with senior energy sector stakeholders, as well as supported the development of an energy policy course. Last, but certainly not least, we have Eddie Oldfield. Eddie is an energetic and dynamic leader and consultant in New Brunswick with a proficiency and passion for spatial analysis. He has coordinated projects for national and provincial clients, often involving a high level of municipal engagement and using geospatial information to support community planning on climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. He previously worked as the director of the New Brunswick Climate Change Hub to conduct community engagement and public education initiatives. Eddie is the New Brunswick and PEI FCM PCP Regional Climate Advisor. I would now like to pass it over to Samantha to provide a recap of the PCP program and introduction to Milestone 4 and 5. Over to you, Samantha.
Thank you, Tanya. As you likely know, the PCP program is a network of local governments who have committed to act on climate change by reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. The program is a partnership with FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, acting as the administrative partner, and ICLEI as the technical partner. There are over 300 municipalities who have joined since the program's launch in 1994. They're at varying degrees and levels of engagement, and part of the Regional Climate Advisor's role is to support stalled members to re-engage. As I said, there's over 300 municipalities, and here you can see their regional distribution. So there's likely more partners than are shown here because the regional climate advisors are doing great work joining up new municipalities all over the country. Just as a reminder, the milestones can be completed at the corporate or the community level of emissions. This is an important consideration when choosing your target and your implementation strategy, which is what we will be talking about today. There are 5 milestones within the PCP program, and this presentation assumes that you have already completed a greenhouse gas inventory and forecast, set a reduction target, and developed a local action plan. In this presentation, the terms local action plan and community energy will be used fairly interchangeably throughout the presentation. Just as a reminder before we dive into the milestones 4 and 5, these are some of the major elements that were included in your local action plan. There's specific tasks, time horizon, and resource allocation. The actions that were outlined in your plan are the jumping off point for your milestone 4 work. Again, before we dive into the details, these are the manners in which you prove to FCM that you have that you're ready to receive your milestones. So, description of the degree to which your local action plan has been implemented, including some details of which we'll discuss, and an outline of the implementation schedule if you are not completed in your implementation. And then in milestone 5, it's basically you redo your inventory, whether it's your corporate or your community milestone that you are aiming for, with a view to the changes since your milestone 1 inventory. So milestone 4 is where you move beyond the plan and into implementation of your predetermined actions. Dr. Amelia Clark will now get into detail about how to implement your plan.
I grew up in Nova Scotia and also lived in Newfoundland for a while and New Brunswick for about 5 years. So being a part of your webinar here means a lot to me. Thank you for including me. I'm happy to talk to you about the content that is in a document I wrote for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities called Pass and Go, Moving Beyond the Plan. And this document is quite useful. It's part of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities toolkit that they did through the Green Municipal Fund, part of their Sustainable Solutions series. So it's a series of documents produced by FCM that document leading edge trends in communities across Canada. It's available in print and online. It's also available in English and in French. So published in 2012, but the findings are still highly relevant today in terms of what structural features are relevant for implementing a community-wide climate action plan or a community-wide sustainability plan. As you're thinking about implementing your plan, it really depends if it's a corporate plan or a community-wide plan, will dictate whether it's better to think about it as a participation approach or a partnership approach. So I'm just going to take a moment to explain the differences here. Participation approach is ideal for a corporate climate action plan or a corporate sustainability plan. This is where the government makes decisions and consults others for input, uses stakeholder engagement to get ideas. The topics are typically within the jurisdiction of the local government, and only the local government implements that plan. A partnership approach, on the other hand, is ideal for a community-wide plan because decision-making is shared through interorganizational collaboration. In other words, you're sharing it with other partners through typically a cross-sector entity, most likely a task force or a committee that you set up with partners to think about the implementation and oversee the implementation. of your community-wide plan. Doing it this way enables the topics to be community-wide and also enables for other partners to be a part of your implementation. What happens with community-wide implementation is you still have your actions from the municipal government or your local government, but you also have the actions from your partners. And partners on a community-wide climate action plan might be your Chamber of Commerce, different businesses. You definitely want any of your major employers in your town or city, different NGOs that might be active, maybe schools, if you have a university or college, hospitals, etc. Any major organization will have a potential impact on being able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore could be part of the implementation of your community-wide plan. So together, the actions taken by your partners, the actions taken by your government make your community-wide implementation. As you're designing this partnership, it's important to think through 5 different structural features. And through our research, we really narrowed it down to, there are a lot of different models out there, but as long as you have these 5 structural features in your design, it will lead you to successfully implementing your plan. So you need some type of oversight entity, some kind of partner engagement mechanism, community-wide actions, which means you want the partners themselves implementing, communication systems, and monitoring systems. So I'm going to walk through each of those in more detail. For the oversight, this is typically some kind of decision-making body, maybe a task force or committee, or you might set up a separate organization, but more often than not, it's a committee. And then you need a secretariat to support that. So that might be a staff person housed in the local government. It might be a part of a staff person's job description, but someone who's responsible for supporting this committee and also overseeing the implementation of the plan. And you might want to involve elected officials on that committee as well. So some tips: seek out your municipal champions. It's also a way to get people from other departments involved with this. Create some kind of community-wide decision-making body or committee. Create a separate community-wide and a separate internal government committee. So don't mix your corporate implementation with your community-wide. Have 2 different entities for that. Assign a staff to coordinate implementation. And oversee, you want this committee to oversee the long-term vision and goals and the shorter-term actions. This is the committee that can monitor whether your implementation is actually working. In terms of partner engagement, what this does is it builds support for your plan, provides avenues for partners to contribute, connects plan topics to partners, and makes it easy to recruit partners. So some tips on this is you want to be able to proactively identify new partners. Don't just wait for the ones that come to you. You may be, there may be certain ones that you want involved with this, so you should proactively invite them. Also, you want to enable new partners to join over time. So the ones that you start with, maybe 2-3 years into it, you want to enable new partners to join, especially because these are going to be long-term in their implementation. And so there may be changes in your city or town that mean that you want to have others join. You want to connect to all the plan topics to partners and also link all actions to plan implementation. In terms of community-wide action, this is where the partners are helping with your implementation. So you still have the municipal government or your local government implementing, and maybe you're doing some things in partnership just directly on a one-off program, but you also want the organizations in your community helping achieve your community-wide vision through their own actions. So if I can give you an example of this, let's say you want to have more electric vehicle charging stations in your community. Yes, you might do some of that on your municipal property, but if you can also have some of your major employers, or let's say the shopping mall, the university, and others also put EV charging stations on their property, then collectively in your community, you're going to have that many more EV charging stations, and it'll help you reach your community-wide goals. So some tips here involve the entire municipality. You might need to do some staff training, but do involve the municipality in the decision-making. Ensure that partners are implementing and reporting back. Ensure council understands the community-wide action and its reporting and accountability, and make sure you monitor progress. In terms of communications, this is important as well. It helps with engagement and monitoring, it helps with networking, it helps with citizen engagement and accountability. Some tips here are provide opportunities for partner networking, create a website so you're disseminating information, celebrate successes and promote achievements, keep your citizens informed, and expect to make adjustments along the way. In terms of monitoring, there's 2 hours of effective monitoring, both the reporting, which people are typically familiar with, but also renewal. So on a community-wide climate action plan, or even a corporate one, you're probably going to want to update it about every 5 years. So you can budget for that in advance. Realize that it's not going to be a static document for the next 20, 30 years. But don't reinvent the wheel. Look to other communities and see what's working for them, and just replicate that. You want to report on your short term, but also link it to your longer term targets. You can use action reports as well as the inventory reports. So action reports, for example, would be this many partners helped do this action in the last year, which helps show the momentum of activity going on in your community. So with these 5 key structural features, we are seeing different models in Canada on how communities are choosing to structure themselves to implement through partnerships. And I'm just going to share 3 different models with you. The first one's from Montreal, related to their Montreal Community Sustainable Development Plan. Montreal has a separate plan for their community-wide sustainability versus their corporate. So it's a good example. That said, obviously Montreal is bigger than any of the communities we have in Atlantic Canada, but the model I'm about to share is quite scalable. So what Montreal has done is they do have a committee made up of over 200 partners. It doesn't meet regularly, it just meets once a year at a gala where they celebrate success. They do have a steering committee within that, which they call their liaison committee, and they have a staff support team. But what's really unique about the Montreal model, and the feature that I like the most, is what they do is they've created a menu of actions that organizations can help with in the community. Some are more geared for business or NGOs, but generally they're these suite of actions. And then they invite partners once a year to look at the actions and say, I can help on these 5. So each year, to be a partner, organizations have to commit to working on at least 5 of these actions. Then they report back the next year on, did we achieve them? Are we still working on them? What will we commit to for the next year? It's actually quite a low capacity way to engage as many partners as you want and still have them involved in the implementation. So some of the advantages of this model is it's scalable. It could work in a mid-size community where your partners might be family-owned businesses and schools, etc., as much as it can work in a larger city. Also, it gives organizations the opportunity to really choose what and how they can help achieve the community-wide vision. So here's a quotation from McGill University, which happens to be a partner on the Montreal strategy. The city didn't ask the partners to share in every priority. It allowed partners to identify where they had the most control, the most opportunity for change. There are some things we can't handle right now, but if we know it's an objective of the greater region, we can plan for it. So you can see how that would be applicable to implementing your community-wide climate action plan. Now, the next story I'm going to tell you is Whistler. And unlike Montreal, Whistler did not create a menu of options for partners to choose from. What they did is they set up different task forces for each community, for each topic area. So they would have one task force that's meeting on transportation, let's say, another one that's meeting on energy. And each of these task forces would pull together the key stakeholders, the key organizations that would be heavily involved in thinking about that particular topic. And so once a year, those committees would meet and the task force would decide, okay, what have we achieved in the last year? What are the priority actions for the coming year? And who should be the implementing organizations? So often it's not the local government who should be the lead on implementing. Maybe it's a provincial entity or economic development association. Maybe it's a utility. Maybe it's a nonprofit or school. So the role of the Secretariat then is to follow up with the implementing organizations to make sure that the plan for the coming year of actions gets implemented. And then the next year they would meet again to check on progress. So what I like about this model is it really creates an ownership for the implementation of the plan and allows them to monitor progress on the actions as well. A quote from this one, Whistler 2020 helps us use community-wide resources in a more coordinated and strategic way to work toward our shared vision. It also helps organizations prioritize actions to better use their internal resources. Rather than requiring new resources, it requires alignment of existing budgets and resources to ensure that all are dedicated to moving towards a shared goal, rather than working inefficiently or at cross purposes. So both Montreal and Whistler have monitoring mechanisms and communication mechanisms as well. The last model I'm going to mention, and only briefly here, is Hamilton. And Hamilton's an example of what many cities are doing across Canada. And that's, instead of setting up a collaborative entity, they keep the decision-making in-house in the local government and then set up an entity or a committee as needed on certain topics. So in Hamilton's, for example, I seem to have jumped forward. They set up a Clean Air Hamilton, which is a multi-stakeholder entity that's focused particularly on that topic. And then they have some ad hoc committees that they've had on different elements. They still have the monitoring, they still have the communications, but they don't have the collaborative oversight entity. This is my least favorite model, even though it's a really common one, because you miss out on that community-wide implementation if you're not careful, and also some topics don't necessarily get addressed if you're not particularly careful. Now, as you're designing your partnership, one of the things to keep in mind is, why are the partners joining? And we did a survey of partner organizations across Canada that are part of these community-wide partnerships to ask them, why is it you're involved? And top on the list were networking, reputation, learning, positive relationships with the community, legitimacy, and also joining for sustainability or climate reasons. But what you should pull from this is, as you're designing your partnership, you want to make sure that there are networking opportunities, that you're recognizing the leaders so that they're gaining the reputation and positive relationships with community, that there are learning opportunities so that they can improve. So if you build these in, then they're more likely to stay with you for the long haul. In our study of looking at particularly community energy plans and climate action plans in Canada, the same list became apparent with one additional one. The reason that partners were engaged in these particular plans in particular were for moral support. So wanting to have that peer support of knowing that we're doing this together. Now we looked at, because we had surveys, we were able to look at the statistical relevance here. And essentially what we found is the structure of the partnership does matter. And in particular, having your partners help implement, having a higher number of partners, and the proactivity of your actions all led to higher progress on the implementation of the plan. In looking at the climate action partnerships in particular in Canada, we looked at 4 cities that are at the Milestone 5. And what we noticed is they all had fewer than 10 partners. Typically, it's the government, utilities, key NGOs. That said, they all had the 5 structural features, though most used the government for oversight and not a committee. So my preference is, if you're designing from scratch, that you think about that partnership approach right from the beginning, and also more partners, because while the fewer than 10 partners might get you to a 15% reduction. And your short-term goals, it certainly won't get us to the long-term goals, those ambitious targets like 80% reduction in GHG emissions by 2050. If we're really going to see that transformational change, then it's going to require all the different actors and in the community to be a part of that transformation. So in conclusion, I highly encourage you to engage partners as part of your implementation of the community-wide plan. It enables a broader mandate, and you have more potential for transformative change in your community. That said, consider the design carefully. As long as you have an oversight entity, partner engagement, community-wide actions, communications, and monitoring, you'll have good success. And you also might want to think about how citizens might be engaged in taking actions. For Atlantic Canadian cities and towns, I think the Montreal model might be most scalable in that it's lower capacity. On the other hand, the Whistler model is also very good if you have a lot of enthusiasm and capacity for this. My final thoughts are, make sure you consider your long-term goals as you choose actions so that you're putting the pieces in place to have that transition to a low-carbon economy. And also, it's highly possible to link this to your sustainability goals too. So as you're taking your climate actions, you're also achieving sustainable development in your community. So with that, I will thank you. And if you have any questions, we do have a website on the project showing the research results, and you're welcome to reach out to me by email as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah now, who's going to tell you more about the research Quest has done.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Amelia. I'll be presenting on the findings from the Community Energy Planning Getting to Implementation in Canada initiative, which relates closely to the steps that you're undertaking to achieve milestones 4 and 5 of the PCP program. The lessons and cases I'll share also complement the 5 keys to success that Dr. Amelia Clark just spoke of. So the Community Energy Planning Getting to Implementation in Canada initiative, which I'll refer to as GTI, was led by Quest, the Community Energy Association, and the Smart Prosperity Institute. So over 3 years, our project team examined community energy planning practices across Canada and developed a suite of tools and resources focused on building the capacity of Canadian communities to develop and implement community energy plans. It was an interactive project. We engaged community energy practitioners through workshops, webinars, focus groups across the country, and incorporated input from over 500 organizations across Canada in the project. So you'll hear me reference community energy planning, climate change action planning throughout my presentation, and you've heard it so far in the webinar. I want to start by clarifying some common misconceptions and the similarities and differences between these 2 types of plans as you think about the takeaways from this presentation. So FCM defines a local climate action plan as a strategic document that outlines how a municipality will achieve its greenhouse gas emission reduction target. And GTI and Quest define a community energy plan as a tool that defines community priorities around energy with a view to improving energy efficiency, reducing greenhouse gas emission reductions, managing future risks, and enhancing local economic development. They're very similar. Both incorporate a community-wide assessment on how energy is being used. They include community-wide energy inventories and action plans for implementation. The one caveat that I'll mention here is that a local action plan must incorporate emissions from transportation, buildings, and waste. Many community energy plans do. If you do have a community energy plan, it could potentially be considered by FCM as a local action plan. And then many of you will also be familiar with municipal climate change action plans, which were required by the government of Nova Scotia in 2014. So these plans should contain an energy inventory and action plan to support climate change mitigation. They also may be recognized by the PCP program, and that's something you can discuss further with your regional climate advisor or FCM directly. So for the purpose of today's presentation, I will use both of these terms pretty interchangeably. So just back to GTI, the project resulted in a suite of tools and resources to support implementation of community energy plans. And two of the milestone resources that I'll focus on today include the Community Energy Implementation Readiness Survey and the Implementation Framework. And together, these tools serve to guide communities as they navigate some of the most common challenges associated with the implementation of community energy plans. And they're tools that are available for free online that your community can take a look at as you try to move beyond milestone 3 into milestones 4 and 5. So it'll come as no surprise to many of you listening that communities often do not know what the next steps are once their community climate action plan is adopted by council. We see many plans and processes that fail to establish a framework that's needed to carry the plan through to implementation. So the Community Energy Implementation Readiness Survey describes a series of 27 factors that in our engagement we found communities should have in place to facilitate the implementation of their community energy plan. The factors are clustered into 5 categories that complement the keys to success that Dr. Amelia Clark just spoke about. So the first is related to the plan itself. The second is the context of the community. I'm not going to go into very much detail on this section today, but essentially it's factors that assess the extent to which the community has kind of a track record in the history of climate action. The third is related to management and governance. The fourth is resourcing, and finally engagement, community-wide engagement. The tool is available at framework.gettingtoimplementation.ca. And the Readiness Survey is accompanied by a Community Energy Implementation Framework, which again provides guidance to communities with respect to implementation. There's 10 strategies in the framework that you can consider, and they focus on aspects like building support among elected officials, staff within the municipality, stakeholders across the community, and those strategies are largely focused on decision making and change management. There's also factors that look at resourcing the plan, so both from a staffing and financial perspective. And it also covers how to institutionalize the plan, which is really all about embedding the plan into the processes and policies of your community and of the processes of your community stakeholders, so it really becomes an integral part of the day-to-day operations and thinking in the community. And again, it's available at the same site, framework.gettingtoimplementation.ca. The survey will also be available as part of the PCP tool later this year, and Samantha will talk more about that after my presentation. So I will start by providing some background on the factor categories described in the Readiness Survey and covering a few best practices and cases that you can kind of delve into on the tool itself online. We learned very quickly in the Getting to Implementation initiative that there is no magic formula for developing a plan. While a lot of plans have very similar elements, we see inventories, action plans, and evaluation indicators in many of the plans. I think the most important aspect is really tailoring the plan to meet the needs of your community and ensuring it's done in a way that the community feels ownership over the plan. So we found that while there's nothing in particular you can do with respect to the content of the plan that'll set it up for implementation, there are things you can do as you develop the plan. And there's kind of principles you can embed into the plan itself. So the first is establishing a clear and inspiring vision that the community can get behind. The second is clear, measurable targets around energy reductions, greenhouse gas emission reductions. The third is a manageable number of actions. That said, actions should lead to significant measurable greenhouse gas emissions reductions and energy reductions. It should be done that allows decision makers to understand the risks associated with not implementing the plan. So in other words, what's the value proposition of developing the plan? So we've seen this done exceptionally well in London, Ontario. So following a combination of extensive analysis and a lot of collaboration across the community, the staff leading their community energy action plan produced a narrative fills the city on energy, the rationale for why they developed their plan and how they're moving forward with implementation. And this has resulted in those key elements. So inspiring action across community, it's charted a pathway with respect to the measures that they're going to undertake and when. And through a series of graphics, I'll show you how they've accomplished that. So the first on the screen shows you how much energy is spent on energy in London every year. In 2016, it was $1.6 billion. And it also shows how much of that spending leaves the local economy. Again, in 2016, just under 90% of energy spending left the local economy. So in these two simple charts, London's made a very clear and effective economic case showing the economic risks of not implementing the plan. So in other words, if they continue to apply a business as usual approach to the way they're managing and planning energy, they will be worse off economically than they would be if they were to implement the plan, which really spoke to decision makers and helped to gain the support they needed from council to move forward with the plan. Continuing with the London example, the city has also illustrated how much they might be able to save with the implementation of the plan. So this graph shows that under a business as usual scenario, the city is on track to increase spending on energy to $1.9 billion a year. And by implementing the suite of actions in the plan, they could shave off quite a lot, avoiding about $250 million a year in energy costs in the long run. They've also calculated that for every 1% reduction in energy use, the city can recirculate $14 million back into the local economy or prevent that money from leaving the economy in the first place. And then to complement this analysis, the city has distilled a series of proposed measures into a priority matrix. They've mapped out the measures that they're considering according to their greenhouse gas emissions reduction impact and financial payback potential. And this simple chart distills the outcomes of their analysis and decision-making process in a way that decision makers can easily understand and digest. So here, just for example, you can see that they've identified in the top right quadrant retrofitting commercial retail buildings, industrial facilities, and older pre-1980 homes would provide the city with the greatest potential for GHG reductions and the highest potential return on investment, which has really allowed to stay scoped and focused and prioritize their actions. Next, I want to talk about management and governance, the oversight of the plan, which echoes the findings from Dr. Amelia Clark's research. So I will echo that it is very important for communities to think about governance and oversight on multiple levels. So at a high level, having a multi-organizational body to oversee implementation is critically important. And at the ground level, having a dedicated staff person, potentially a network of staff people and champions across the community in the long run is also very important. With GTI, we found that a highly effective model was to establish a committee of council, which has provided a lot of success in both Yellowknife and the city of Edmonton. So in these instances, a committee of council has been established that reports either directly to council or to the city manager. And in both cases, the council acts as an ambassador for the plan. They advise council on the implementation of the plan and evaluate the performance of the plan, ensuring ongoing momentum and oversight through its implementation. I also want to talk briefly about the importance of having a dedicated staff person. So the implementation of a local action plan requires, we've heard this over and over, it requires organized coordination across multiple departments and stakeholder groups if it's going to be done effectively. And this requires a lot of time, coordination, collaboration. So it is very critical for when you're developing a plan to have a dedicated staff person in place once the plan is adopted to ensure that it moves forward with implementation. In some cases, the person or the network of people may be different than the people who actually develop the plan itself. So that's something to consider. And you know, there's a couple of models that we've seen unfold that you can think about, particularly in a smaller community context. So the first is to assign oversight to an existing staff person if there's capacity within the local government. And the second is to fund a new position. This can be either within a local government or within an external organization. In most cases, we've seen the dedicated staff person be employed by the municipality, but we've seen effective models unfold elsewhere as well, where the staff person might be employed by an arm's length organization. Many communities have recognized the economic development benefits of implementing community energy plans and have decided to dedicate a staff person either within the Economic Development Department or the Economic Development Corporation. Wawa in Ontario provides a good example of the staff person being within the Economic Development Corporation, and you can read more about that on the framework's site. And many of you are probably thinking about how you fund a dedicated staff person. This is a common challenge. Resourcing is a key success factor, and we've heard in communities large and small, from coast to coast, that it is a challenge. It's not always easy to gain the support you need to fund a dedicated staff person. So talk about resourcing, as well as resourcing the actual operating and maintenance costs of the plan. I'll start with staffing. And there's two things to think about when you're resourcing staff. The first is developing the right skill set, or finding the person that has the right skill set to lead implementation. I'm not going to go into detail on the skills you heard were important. You can find that list on the framework site, but what I will focus on is funding that dedicated staff person. So many of you may be thinking about how to fund a dedicated staff person, and this brings us to resourcing, which is a key success factor for implementation. And we've heard communities across Canada are struggling to really find the support needed to fund a dedicated staff person. So we can think about resourcing along two lines. One is staff, one is the actual capital, operating, and maintenance costs of implementing the plan itself. So I'll start with staff. There's two things to think about when you're thinking about staffing for the implementation of a community energy plan. The first is developing finding the person with the right skill set to lead implementation. I won't go into detail on the kind of skills that are needed for implementation. You can find that on the framework site. But I will focus on the actual funding component of a dedicated staff person, which we know many communities struggle with. So many communities have successfully justified the creation of a new staff position as a result of the nature of the work that the person is leading. So they recognize that the savings on energy spending that can be achieved by the dedicated staff person can often far outweigh the costs of creating the new position. And in addition, that person plays a central role in implementing projects that go beyond just the financial benefits of implementation. We know community energy plan implementation can lead to other significant benefits, improved health conditions through improved air quality, for example, economic development opportunities fostered through the creation of new jobs and industries. And you can read a little bit more about those benefits, in particular in one of the reports we produced as part of GTI, the community energy planning, the value proposition. But we've seen some successful and interesting models emerge around resourcing. So one would be the BC Hydro Community Energy Manager Program. So BC Hydro co-funds staff positions in small BC-based local governments that display leadership on climate action. And we've seen in many cases the local government hire the new staff on board after the 2-year term that's set out as part of the program. Again, as a result of the savings that they've been able to achieve with energy reductions and some of the other community benefits they've been able to achieve. Efficiency Nova Scotia also has an embedded energy manager program. I believe it's a little bit more geared to large municipalities, but it's something you can talk about with your regional facilitator and Quest as well. And we do anticipate there'll be some funding emerging with FCM to support staff positions in the near future, which Samantha will talk about as well. But all to say that there's ways that, there's different models you can consider to implement to fund staff positions that may be external to the municipality the municipality. So in the absence of funding programs, community can also consider maybe co-funding arrangements with local partners like utilities. Small communities can consider sharing a dedicated staff person. We've seen an interesting model emerge in Manitoba. Eco West is a local nonprofit that is achieving kind of economies of scale by producing inventories and plans for small communities under 20,000 people. Their focus has been on milestones 1 and 2 in the communities that they work with, but in Atlantic Canada, you can consider how a similar model might unfold. And again, it's very complex. It's challenging it's not always straightforward on how to fund a staff position. So I would encourage you to start, if you don't already have a dedicated staff person, to start speaking with other departments within your local government and other community stakeholders about what innovative models you might consider for this. It's something we've heard is critically important. And then really quickly, the second lens I want to talk about is funding and incentives to support the capital, operating, and maintenance costs of project and program implementation. So, the implementation of climate action plans requires new partnerships, new business models to come to fruition. There's many of the common measures we see in plans include district energy projects. We're seeing a lot of communities start to consider virtual net metering projects, which are on the horizon in many jurisdictions across Canada. The implementation of widespread active transportation networks, just as some examples. And in these instances, communities can look to establish new partnerships or arm's length organizations to oversee the implementation of projects. I think what's important for communities to think about what might be funded by the municipality outright and what could be funded and what types of funding can be accessed by organizations external to the community. I think there's a growing school of thought that, I should say there's a misconception. Oftentimes because a community energy plan is led by a municipality, I think there's a perception that it should be implemented and funded by the municipality, when in reality the plan is and should be designed as a community-wide plan. It's a plan really for the community as a whole, and I think it's important to start conversations very early in the process, as early as possible, to talk about how different stakeholders might access different sources of funding and what they might be able to implement as part of the plan. The last factor category covered in the Readiness Survey is engagement. So there was she made a really good, Dr. Amelia Clark made a really good point that the effective implementation of local action plans and measures that lead to deep greenhouse gas emissions reductions is tricky. It requires stakeholders from across the community to mobilize and coordinate efforts and follow through with their commitments. So the list on the screen provides a non-exhaustive list, a snapshot of some of the key stakeholders that could and I think should be engaged as early as possible in planning and implementation efforts. It just, again, echoes and reflects the point that Dr. Amelia Clark was making around the importance of widespread engagement, that community energy plans are really intended for the community as a whole, and there are a long list of stakeholders that have a potential role to play in community greenhouse gas reduction efforts. So I'll leave it there. I think the point on engagement was covered quite broadly, but again, there's some factors addressed in the Readiness Survey that allows communities to assess where exactly they stand on engagement and where they might be able to improve their efforts. And so I'll pause to pass it back over to Samantha, and happy to answer questions at the end.
Thanks, Sarah and Dr. Amelia Clark. So before we get into the provincial context information, I wanted to bring to your attention some upcoming additions to the PCP's Milestone tool, and Sarah alluded to this as well. At the moment, there are modules for the early milestones, but by late 2018, the tool will be updated with modules for milestones 4 and 5 that will make your submissions more straightforward. So some examples of those modifications, those additions, will be a table that auto-populates from your milestone 3 submission in order for you to include your implementation actions and timelines. There will also be, as Sarah mentioned, the implementation readiness survey, which will be an optional inclusion. It's not necessary for your submission to be accepted, but it will, as Sarah said, recommend resources that might help you with your implementation strategies. For milestone 5, there will be an option to include your greenhouse gas emissions inventory and to do some analysis and comparison with your module 1 inventory. So those are things to look forward to. One other thing that I wanted to mention is, depending on when you join the PCP program, you might not be particularly familiar with the PCP Hub, which is a networking site for PCP members. So I've included here a couple of the options. So there's a Q&A portion, also some groups that you can join based on your interests. But there's one of the interesting things related to information sharing is you can upload documents. So if you have a particularly innovative plan or you're looking for innovations, you can go to the PCP Hub and either ask a question, start a discussion, or browse the documents that are available there. So I would very much encourage you to make use of this great resource for PCP members. And now I'm going to include some provincial context that can help you with your implementation of your actions that you laid out in milestone 3. And these will be done provincially. So in Nova Scotia, where I'm located, you should definitely be including Efficiency Nova Scotia in any energy efficiency projects or building projects that you are undergoing. If you are interested, if you had indicated that you were going to look into PACE financing, there are great resources here between the Clean Foundation and Efficiency Nova Scotia that are running existing programs. And there's a lot of information about bylaw adaptation as well. Just as a note, Nova Scotia Power is the utility that would require interconnections if you had renewable energy programs, projects that you were aiming to implement. And also, the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities, up until recently, had a municipal sustainability office, but that is no longer the case. In attempts to cover this gap, Quest has a municipal energy learning group, which is kind of a resource for municipalities and a peer-to-peer learning opportunity. The Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities does have an asset management program, and so they're still a great resource for municipalities in this space. Also, fairly recently, the Department of Energy has hired some staff, termed the Clean Energy Development Coordinators, who have some time available to help municipalities get the support they need. And I've included a couple of their emails below. It may be best to connect with me directly, and I can connect you with the appropriate contact there. In Newfoundland and Labrador, there are also some resources available for municipalities on this track. One of the things I wanted to mention was the Take Charge is the place to turn to for assistance on energy efficiency rebates and information. There's a newly introduced net metering policy with Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro that is making it more possible to have renewable energy distribution projects within your municipality. There's more information coming on that, but it's definitely something to consider. Also, Municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador, MNL, is revamping their Tidy Towns initiative and will be incorporating some information, or sorry, some indicators on related to both climate change adaptation and mitigation. So I'm working with them on that. And the government of Newfoundland and Labrador has a great website full of interesting checklists, interesting information on climate change, both adaptation and mitigation. And that can be found at turnbackthetide.ca. And now I'm going to turn it over to Eddie for the Provincial Contexts in New Brunswick and PEI.
Thank you, Samantha. So I am located in New Brunswick, and in New Brunswick, the Climate Change Action Plan has a number of actions that support municipalities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as well as adapt to climate change. They are both informal and formal requirements for municipalities to advance action on climate change. In addition, NB Power is the lead for offering efficiency programs. And they also recently have a new staff person as a CEP advisor, so an advisor for municipalities advancing community energy plans and implementing projects. In addition, they offer a number of programs aimed at small-scale renewable energy. This includes the locally owned renewable energy projects program and the small-scale program for net metering. A key source for funding of various projects would be the New Brunswick Environmental Trust Fund, and it can be used to match federal funding. We anticipate new program resources in 2018. There was a significant investment made by the province of New Brunswick into energy efficiency and addressing climate change. There are 2 municipal associations that would be excellent resources for municipalities in New Brunswick. The Union of Municipalities of New Brunswick and the Association Francophone des Municipalités au Nouveau-Brunswick are both leading multi-municipal projects, which involve at least a dozen municipalities to advance milestones 1 to 3. And they've gone further to work with municipalities that already have their plans in place to develop and fund projects basically implementing emission reduction measures. And finally, I would add that we operate a municipal working group for New Brunswick and PEI. This is a resource for municipalities that are implementing plans and projects as a great opportunity for peer-to-peer exchange. And following that, I'll talk a little bit about Prince Edward Island. And Efficiency PEI is the place to turn to for assistance on energy efficiency programs, as well as rebate programs. They are expanding those programs this year. PEI Climate Change Action Plan also supports municipal action to reduce emissions and adapt to climate change. This includes specific actions as well as assistance to projects. I think it's up to 10% project cost. That can also be used to help match federal funding. And again, our municipal working group is for both New Brunswick and PEI municipalities that are engaged in implementing their community energy plans and projects. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the additional resources available to you as PCP members. So first of all, we offer one-on-one technical support. There is the email that's listed here you can reach out through. You can also reach out to us through the PCP Hub, or feel free to contact either of us on the line today. We provide peer review service for milestone applications, and so when you're looking to submit for your next milestone, do not hesitate to reach out, and we can ensure that your applications are completed properly. There's a number of tools, case studies, and guidance documents, including the PCP Milestone tool, which Samantha outlined for us. Finally, we do offer networking and training, and there's a number of workshops that we offer throughout the year. There's the PCP Hub, and peer-to-peer learning of regional advisors, which we organize throughout the year. And certainly take a look at our quarterly newsletter. You can subscribe to the PCP newsletter on the FCM website. Now I'm going to turn it back to Tanya.
Great. Thank you so much, Eddie. And thank you to all of our presenters. Before we wrap up for the day, I thought we would just do, we'd ask each one of our presenters a question for them to answer, and then we will close out the webinar. So we've selected some questions that are sort of most commonly asked and potentially of interest to you. So for Amelia, Dr. Amelia Clark, could you elaborate on the point you made about stakeholder partnership models in Canada? Are you finding that the combination of informal stakeholder and public engagement, issue-based stakeholder groups, and local government-led partnership models are sufficient for getting started and sustaining long-term implementation?
Thanks for your question. I'm thinking about the answer. So I'm a fan of formal partnership models over informal. I'm also a fan of a collaborative model over a consultation model. And it would be the caution I would give to communities that are setting this up. If you set up a collaborative community committee where your partners are engaged in the decision making and they feel ownership over helping implement that plan, in the long run, they're also then going to leverage their own resources to help you achieve that community-wide vision. If you set it up in such a way that it's really consultation and they're giving advice to the local government, even though it's a community-wide plan, they'll see that their view will always be that it's the local government's responsibility to ensure implementation, to fund implementation. So coming back to stakeholder engagement, there's really the stakeholder engagements of your organizations and of your partners, and then there's stakeholder engagement of citizens. And I see the two as different. So when I talk about collaborative models and partnership, I'm really thinking about organizations, all sorts of different sizes. It could be a community, a family-owned restaurant to a university that could all be a part of this, but it's not the same thing as citizens. So having an engagement mechanism for your citizens separate from what you're doing with organizations will twofold enable them to provide input into the directions you're going, but also enable you to leverage them in terms of implementing in their own households and their own buying patterns, etc. So big fan of formal, to answer your question. If I could add just a couple of other minor details here, it's you can add partners at any time. So even if they weren't involved with formulating your plan, it doesn't mean that they won't be interested in being involved in implementing your plan. So don't feel like you're locked into the ones that you worked with initially. You can really expand that if you want to. The other thing I would say is if your plan is over 5 years old, it's probably time to renew it, which again is an opportunity to bring in new players and new partners to think about the implementation. So I'll leave it at that, but I think Sarah also covered some really great information around where to house your staff. And if you're going to house it outside of your local government, then in my experience, it needs to come with core funding, because I've seen more than one story where it was housed in an NGO, and then after about 5 years, the core funding ran out and it completely undermined the future of that community-wide initiative. So if you're going to house it outside of that, you also have to think about the long-term viability of that position. So I'll stop there. Thanks for the question.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, Sarah, question for you. Can you elaborate on the point you made about funding the implementation of CEPs and further clarify the role of the municipality relative to other community stakeholders?
Sure. So I think just to reiterate, it's a point that's come up many times now. The importance of the community-wide nature of planning activities. So as you're thinking about milestones 4 and 5, I think it's really important to have that lens on kind of all aspects of decision making. And so when it comes to funding, there's been some work done, lots of work done actually. There are many resources available, some on the GTI site that talk about the nuances around funding that go beyond the municipality. So I know a lot of times communities will, the municipality themselves and external community stakeholders will have kind of an expectation that funding is being provided by the local government itself, whether it's through grants or through financing opportunities, for example, local improvement charges, that kind of thing, which are very critical, very important. And as Dr. Clark alluded to, it's very important that local governments provide ongoing core funding for planning activities. But because the end goal is really to mobilize community-wide stakeholders, I think it's important really in the process to have a conversation around what sources of funding, what sources of funding other community stakeholders might be able to access, whether it's kind of low interest loans or other sources of capital funding or financing, and have those conversations again really as early as possible in the process. There's one resource, I'll just name it here really quickly. It's also available on the GTI site, if I can pull it up. It's the IEA Energy Technology Network. Recently put out a report that covers a number of Canadian examples of just innovative funding models that have been applied across Canada on energy projects. So it's worth checking out. And again, that can be found on the GTI site.
Great, thanks so much, Sarah. I've got one last question, but this question is for both Samantha and Eddie. You had mentioned that you have municipal working groups in your regions, and I just wanted you to provide a bit of more detail about those working groups and how it relates to the role that you play as a regional advisor. So maybe I'll call on Samantha to go first to talk about Nova Scotia, and then Eddie will call on you to talk about New Brunswick and PEI.
Great, thanks, Tanya. So as I mentioned, Quest facilitates the Municipal Energy Learning Group in Nova Scotia, which is a group that was launched in 2016. And it's a resource for municipalities that are engaged in community energy planning, partnership building, smart energy projects. And it's an opportunity for them to share their experiences and their lessons learned. It's a rather informal group of generally municipal staff. And we get together to learn about things of common interest, so green building practices, PACE financing, that sort of thing. And then at each meeting we have kind of a round table of updates. And sometimes that's about opportunities and sometimes that's about challenges. And so it's to overcome the feeling that a lot of kind of energy managers, where they exist, or those who are interested in energy at the municipal level, they often feel quite isolated at their municipality. They're the only one working in this space, and they're not sure if they're heading in the right direction. So this gives them a space to collaborate with others who are fulfilling the same role at different municipalities, and to talk about some of the kind of ins and outs of energy planning at the community scale. We try to move around the province and also do some study tour type visits, so get a little bit of hands-on learning as well.
Yeah, I would echo that. The Municipal Working Group for New Brunswick PEI is an opportunity for energy managers or those municipal staff that are responsible for energy and greenhouse gas emission action plans to have an opportunity to come together, learn about what's working in other places and what are some common challenges. So it is a peer-to-peer exchange of how they might be approaching the implementation of a community energy plan or specific projects. So it's a learning opportunity. We also learn what's not working and what are their challenges. And in doing that, we also then can develop initiatives to address those challenges. Those could be engagement initiatives, policy advocacy, or research designed to help overcome barriers that they may be facing in common, but they don't necessarily know that until they have that peer-to-peer exchange.
Perfect. Thank you all. I'm just going to flip up on our screen contact information for both Samantha Peverill and for Eddie Oldfields. So both of them, as you are now aware, are the regional climate advisors for FCM's PCP program in your respective provinces. So thank you very much to all of our presenters for today, to Samantha Peverill, to Dr. Amelia Clark, to Sarah Marchionda and Eddie Oldfields. I do hope that all of you listening in found the information presented today to be very useful. And if you are in need of more information, please do reach out to your regional climate advisor for that information. Thank you again for joining us.